Welcome to From Clinical to Entrepreneurial, OT Private Practice Journeys, an Ontario Society of Occupational Therapists podcast. In this series, we connect with occupational therapists, private practitioners, and business owners, and we hear about their inspiration, their stories, and their lessons learned. I'm Seema Sandwani, OSOT's Director of Strategic Partnerships and Practice. In this final episode, my co-host Shari and I chat with Julie Entwistle, an occupational therapist who started her own company in 2004 and grew it to a team of over 50. She sold her company in 2019, and then in 2022, she forged a new path and started a business coaching space where she coaches, trains, and consults with healthcare professionals. If you've ever wondered how big you want your private practice to be, or struggled with the clinician versus business owner identity shift, this episode is packed with honest insights, tough questions, and practical strategies for making the right choice. Welcome to our podcast. We're so pleased to have you join us, and we're going to jump right in. So tell us a little bit about you and how you became an entrepreneur.
Sure, absolutely. Nice to be here. So I graduated from OT school at McMaster in 2000, and I actually graduated with a newborn. So I was a new mom entering my OT career. And the most important thing to me was that I had flexibility and freedom over my schedule and my ability to kind of work my life around my young family. So I went into the insurance sector in Ontario and found the company culture in that sector to be a bit challenging. So the first couple of places I worked for were very interested in meeting the needs of insurers. And I was trying to provide a service to, individuals that needed occupational therapy. So I just found it was a cultural miss for me. And so I struggled to kind of help them build their businesses when I didn't believe in their vision, which was to provide great service to insurance companies.
So you were worrying about sort of conflict of interest issues and so on, with a little bit of a bias toward either the legal side or to the insurer side, and sort of tuning their interventions a little too far in one direction or the other?
There was no pressure per se, but it was one of those things where you'd come into work every day and you'd see the mission and vision on the wall and you're like, it doesn't speak to me.
Yeah,
right.
Just incongruence with your personal values, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just an ethical mismatch. Yeah. I've had those experiences before too. Yeah.
Yeah. And do I align myself with people who have a different vision for what this service provides than what I do? And I think that's where we're always clinicians first, right? And if we want to talk about business, it's people over profit all day.
Right.
And the minute you flip to being profit over people, you're missing the mark in a healthcare service industry. And I've learned that, many times over the years. So what happened was I ended up having baby 2 and then baby 3 and 4. And
oh my gosh, you were a busy mother. I stopped at 2 and I was like, this might be too many.
Well, 3 and 4 were a bit of a surprise and they came at the same time. So
okay.
When I was leaving to go on mat leave with that pregnancy, I had an experience with this company that I worked for where I was managing the OT department, where I was sitting at my desk one day and there was some people in the hallway chatting about the services the company provided. And I could hear the owners of the company talking to someone. I didn't know who that someone was. And they said, "Oh, what's your biggest department?" And they said, "Oh, occupational therapy." And the person said, "Well, what do they do?" And these owners said, I don't know. Here, Julie's an OT. Can you come, tell these people what occupational therapy is? And it landed so poorly on me because I'm thinking, we're a large department, we're generating a ton of revenue for you, and you don't even know what we do. So I just knew at that point that I had to make a different choice. So while I was on maternity leave with my twins, one of the insurance adjusters I'd worked quite closely with reached out, and a lot of us are accidental entrepreneurs. And this person said, "Hey, can you just do this on your own?" And at the time, there was no barriers to entry in that sector. I was looking for flexibility and freedom. I needed to manage my life with my work, and my career was very important to me. So I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll take on some clients from home." And that's how it started. And that was in 2005.
So doing the math, then you were about 5 years of working for somebody else before you launched out on your own?
Give or take some mat leaves, So I probably had 2 to 3 years of experience in the clinical sense. Working in the industry. So I understood the industry well. I understood the workflow. I understood the politics, the personalities, how relationships worked. But I was ready to do it sort of under my own, I guess, match with my values, which was provide
Right.
great service. Yeah.
And at that point in time, it sounds like you'd been doing some management. So did you have a little bit of the sort of business skills going into it, or were you more focused in your management on, the day to day with the therapists as opposed to big picture business?
Yeah, I think the management role was really just leadership. It was leading other
Okay.
people to do the work really
Clinical
well. Clinical
clinical
leadership. Yeah.
leadership. Okay. So it was a new area for you.
Well, but I come from an entrepreneurial family. So my family were
Oh, interesting.
franchisors. And so we had a franchise business when I was growing up. And so I worked a lot with my dad as a teenager in the franchise business
Okay.
that we own. So I had some of that
Yeah.
and some influence there. But really just no accidental entrepreneur, like I said. So.
Yeah. So how did things develop from that point on?
Well, this is what happens, right? You start
Yeah.
providing a service on your own and you end up doing it well in whatever
Yeah.
way you're doing it. And all of a sudden you've got this challenge of needing to turn work away or to bring people into your business to service the work that you're being requested to do.
Yeah.
So I got too busy and had to make that decision of am I building a business or am I going to be a solopreneur and just being an independent occupational therapist? And I've always been a huge fan of, well, leadership, but also student training. And so
Yeah.
I started bringing students into my business on placement and would
Okay.
teach them what I know, would teach them my industry, and they all started staying and working for me.
Okay. So
And
how did you work out those finances? Because I know that that can be challenging and it is a problem with us therapists where you want to pay the people who you're working with as much as you possibly can. But then unfortunately, and I know that money mindset is one of the things that you do work with people on now, but unfortunately then we start trying to pay them so much that you have to work extra to be able to afford to pay the people to work with you. So how did you work on that balance? What did you do?
well, I'll tell you, I would say most people make a mistake from the beginning and learn from it.
Yeah,
So typically we start by paying too much.
yeah,
And, we're healthcare professionals, we're people pleasers. We want to be good at relationships. And so when we're learning, we tend to just say yes and we lean into an experience and then we reevaluate later. So I think most of the therapists I brought on early, I paid more than I paid them what I could pay them at the time based on a conversation we had about how much support I was going to need to provide them and where that
okay,
support was going to come from. Because typically when we're newpreneurs or solopreneurs, we are our own biggest biller. So
yeah,
we are generating the most revenue for the company. And so where does my time come from
Right.
to grow and lead the next generation in my own business? Because that's revenue lost,
Right. You're
right?
taking it away. There's only so many
yeah.
hours in a day. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
Exactly.
what was your process? Did you sort of look at the hourly rate that you were receiving, the hourly compensation that you were receiving for those therapists, and build it into that formula where you were like, okay, well, I can cover whatever 50% of that to the therapist, but then that remaining amount needs to go to expenses and to pay for my time, or how did you go about that? And I'm thinking here like as specific as you can be for someone who's at that stage where they're just like, but I don't know even where to start. Like,
Right.
what's the actual formula? What's the math? What do I like write down on a piece of paper and add up with my calculator?
Yeah. Well, and in fairness, I had come from being a consultant myself. So I knew
Yeah.
how it felt to be a consultant. And funny enough, my first job out of school, I was paid $30 an hour. And as somebody who had worked at Scotiabank as a manager, I was a manager of Scotiabank on weekends, and I was making 14 something an hour when I graduated from OT school. So here I am, my first job as an OT, I'm offered $30 an hour. Thinking this is double what I've ever made.
Yeah.
The second job, I was offered 45. I'm thinking I have just gone up in hourly rate more than I made at the bank after 9 years of being an employee. So I knew what the going rate was in my industry. And there is a formula. It tends to be, 60-40, 50-50, or 40-60, depending on how much time, again, that person needs. The minute you move into more of like a 70-30, meaning 70 to the
Yeah.
therapist, 30 to the owner, depending on your overhead and your operational costs, that's usually not sustainable. But we don't learn that until we try it for a year and we go, okay, wait a minute. I'm basically netting nothing because
Yeah.
I've got to pay administration support. I've got my own time road and then a successful attempt to get off the road. But
Okay.
for a long time, I wanted to continue to be the user of my own product. So I wanted to receive referrals like my clinicians do. I wanted to write the reports that we had built and templated. I wanted to have to be, in the trenches doing the work. But I also was a bit of a specialist in my practice around a certain area of clinical skill. So I had to transfer that knowledge to other people so that when those referrals came in, it didn't have to be me. So that took me honestly 3 to 5 years to successfully transition myself away from that. So then the way my time went was once I was non-clinical, then I would spend my time mentoring and training. So bringing in new therapists, helping them align with our vision and our values, teaching them how to do what we were doing, providing them with the time. And then we had split up our team. So I was supervising the other therapists that worked for us, and I would be available to them. I'd be available to review their reports. I tended to play the role of managing the operations and the office, and that's where my skill set was. My business partner was phenomenal at relationships and being out talking to people. So
Okay. Networking, marketing.
she spent not most of her time. She also had, clinicians to supervise, but she enjoyed the outreach part of the business more than I did. So you want to talk about marketing, and I'm going to segue into that, but it was, there's really two ways to grow a healthcare business. One is just to be really good and to provide a really great product. So your timelines are good. You turn around a referral, you've got a clinician out to see somebody, they've got a report submitted in a timely fashion. You follow the rules, you don't skip any steps, right?
Yeah.
And you just do really good work, and you have a really good reputation. The clients talk highly of your therapist. They tell the referral source that your therapists are great. That will generate work in and of itself, right? Word of mouth, reputation.
Natural marketing. Yeah.
Natural marketing. The other half of it is being out, being known, building relationships with new people, trying to get people to try you on at least once to see if you might be a fit for them. And the industry that I was in, it was really important that as colleagues, we supported each other. And so even just networking with your colleagues and understanding who else was out there doing good work. So if we couldn't take something on, we knew who we could suggest, to clients or to referral sources to be helpful to. So that's kind of how we built the business over time, was sort of me managing the operational side, which is where my time went, and my business partner doing some of that, but really doing a lot of the outreach and the relationship pieces.
So Julie, let me ask you a little bit about your role as this operational manager in terms of the onboarding and supporting therapists. So did you have a policy and procedures manual? Do you have a website that you would send people to? Talk to us about your resources.
Yeah. So actually, because I was such a big fan of student training, when I had students on placement, I would often have them involved in a project relating to the business. So one of the students wanted to take on, because they always had choice, was building a resource library for us. So we built a really great Dropbox resource where we had all the clinicians send in their best resources on however we sorted it. And the student put together this resource location for us. So that was one piece of onboarding and training, was that our therapists came in and they knew that that's where they could find a lot of sample reports, treatment resources. So that was sort of the clinical side. From a policies and procedures perspective, absolutely. Like I said, I had a policy on what to pay people. I had a policy on contracts and what our contracts look like. We had a service agreement in our contracts that said, this is what we're expecting of you. We need you to sign to say that reports need to be in 3 days, and referral clients need to be met within 5 if you're taking on a referral. Because I learned through making mistakes that not having those things documented and not having them clear, like clarity really is the path. If people weren't clear on what we expected, then it created a much harder conversation after, when they didn't meet an expectation they didn't know we had of them, right?
And what did your policy format look like? Was this sort of a checklist that you provided everybody? Here's a check, or was it more sort of educational in your sessions that you had with them and you had them sign to indicate that they understood? How did you go about that?
Few things. I mean, our administration team had their own way of navigating referrals and, processing a referral from sort of start till when it was handed off to the clinician. So it would start as a general understanding of what the intention was and what our service requirements were. And then they would have a checklist, but eventually people I mean, checklists are super helpful, but eventually they just
Mm-hmm.
knew the role and they knew the role well. And then we would have our monthly metrics to monitor that we were meeting our service standards.
Yeah.
So it kind
And
of comes full circle from intention right through to monitoring the metric.
right, which
Yeah.
is super important. And I know because when you were doing this, because when did you sell? It was
2019, I sold my practice.
2019
Yeah.
you sold. So you sold pre-AI.
And pre-COVID. Huh.
That's right. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
you got in there just in time. Good for
Just in
you.
time. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so I know that now the systems are quite different, right? You can just dictate your process, upload it to GPT, it spits out a list and you say, here you go. But you had a different approach. You had to be a little more focused in sort of how you spent your time and how you taught your therapist, it sounds like.
Well, I was also doing my MBA through a lot of that as well. So through my
Mm,
MBA, I was taking courses in entrepreneurship and organizational leadership and
right.
managerial accounting. So I was applying all the learning of
Yeah.
my MBA to my own business.
Yeah.
So that was a real win for me because I was learning, business acumen and strategy, and then I would take it and turn it into a process that then I would educate, train, inform. And ideally, you're delegating that to somebody to take over and manage for you. One of
Yeah.
the biggest problems with entrepreneurs is if they can't delegate, eventually they become their own bottleneck, right?
Absolutely. Well, and similar to what you said about you had sort of a, I know we can't say specialty, so I'm not saying
Yeah,
specialty or
I did, but
specialization,
You
but
can't
you
say
had that
expert. You can say
skill.
specialized. You
yeah,
just
That's,
can't say
you know
expert. So
what?
you're okay.
I always run from the word specialized too.
Yeah.
But it's true, right? If you don't have the opportunity to share that with other people, your referrals will dry up too because people aren't going to keep going. So I just wanted to back up with just a couple quick questions before we move on. So one was, did you have a certain number of, and I know it might be hard to remember this far back, the exact numbers, so I'm not asking, but like sort of a good number of billable hours that you used as a marker to be like, okay, if I have that many billable hours, if my clinic profit is 30, I know there was more involved than just clinical profit in that 30, but at what point do I have enough funds to know that I can compensate myself if I'm not bringing in any other income to the practice? Like, was there a number for you?
um,
Or number of therapists working?
well, I remember this conversation with my business partner where we said, okay, so if we both want to earn X more per year,
Yeah,
right, in terms of retained earnings out of the business, we would need 10 more therapists, which means we'd need 300 more referrals, which means we'd
yeah,
need X many more admin. Like we had the math. And we kind of looked at each other and said, like, do you want to work that hard? And she's like, no. And I said, me
yeah,
neither. For what the return that we were going to get, because
yeah,
eventually it's when you scale, it's not linear,
yeah,
right? So eventually you have to have an exponentially larger number of things in order to feed the larger group. And to get to the 50 some odd clinicians that we had and the hundreds of referrals and the hundreds of referral sources, and like that was a 15-year process.
yeah,
And to scale it even exponentially to give us what we thought was a little bit more, it would have taken us another 3 to 5 years.
yeah,
And eventually you become to stability with that, where you think actually things are good. We've got cash flow, we've got great clinicians, and yes, we looked at hours and their contribution to the revenue and that in the business, but coming as a consultant, what I didn't want to do is pressure my people to work hours that fit the business, because again, people over
mm-hmm,
profit. So
yep,
what are you looking for from me, OT? What type of files are you looking for? How many hours are you looking to work? And if you tell me you're looking to work 20 hours, then let me hold you to the 20 hours and make sure that you're not working 30 and getting paid 20,
yep.
right? Or that you're working 10 and actually want to work 20. Like that's a me bad. That working 30, paying 20 is a you
Okay.
bad, right?
So you didn't pay per billable hour. They came in and you said, okay, I'm going to pay you for 20 hours a week.
No, we paid them per billable hour,
Oh,
but it
I
was
see.
goal-driven hours. So
Right. And then
I wanted
generating the referrals to meet that need.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I didn't want anybody
Okay.
with lost capacity, but I also didn't want anybody overworking files for no payment to them or for revenue for the business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So
That makes sense.
it was constantly monitoring that, but I know some businesses pressure people to come in and be full time. Like you've got to give us whatever
Yeah.
many billable hours. And well, the profession of OT is a lot of women who have families who
Yeah.
want to balance their family with their practice. And if you can support that and just make sure that they're not giving anything away, right? And because it was worse for me to have somebody working more than they were being paid. Like that was not a
Yeah.
success, even though some OTs would be like, well, I'm doing all this work and I'm providing this great service, but it's not a great service if you're not actually being paid for it.
That's right. And you don't want that breakdown either between, the clinic lead and then the therapist. You want to have that positive relationship. And,
Over servicing clients is not a reputation we wanted to have.
yeah.
Right?
Well,
it's not therapeutically beneficial for you to rely on me to that level when I don't have funding to provide you with the service I'm trying to provide you.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm seeing what you're saying now. Yeah. So it's interesting that you said that about the expectation of hours, because a couple of years ago we were looking around at what the other OT companies were doing, and a lot of them had an employee model, and we'd always been pretty highly independent contractor model, for a lot of the similar reasons that you mentioned, Julie. So we thought, okay, listen, we're going to develop an employee model as well. With the employee model, we did the math and we're kind of like, oh, we got to have about 28 to 30 billable to make this work over time if we're going to have vacation and all the other benefits. One person in all that time has gone for employee. Actually, we just had a second person. Everyone else wants to stay independent contractor, which I found really interesting because I really thought from looking at the market that everyone was going to want employee, but that's not how it worked out.
Well, employee is interesting because you can be an hourly employee or you can be a salaried employee.
That's true. Yeah.
And there's very little difference from an hourly employee to an hourly contractor, except hourly contractors make more because they aren't as expensive to run from a business perspective. So I will tell you though, most businesses are shifting away from independent contractor because there has been a movement within the CRA and the taxation rules around independent to dependent contractor. And the last thing any business owner wants is for the government to come back and say, these have actually been employees the whole time. You owe us 5 years of backed employee and health tax, EI, CPP. Like businesses in healthcare don't typically have the protected cash to turn around and pay the government $500,000 because they've had the wrong employment situation with their people.
Yeah.
So it's
which
a big
is
risk.
definite. It is, yeah, and definitely something to keep for listeners to keep making sure that you consult with your accountant and your legal support to make sure that what you are offering, because we've had to go through that process a few times. Are they truly an independent contractor or are they an employee? Right. Okay, so then the other question was jumping back into the networking comment that you made about your partner. What were the events or activities that she used for her networking? And did you do any like electronic style marketing online?
Yeah, so actually it's a good question because the nice thing about being an owner is do what you like to do. So I would go to all the golf events because I love golf and I like playing golf. So those are like she might.
I'm always so upset when I get one of those golf emails. I'm like, oh no.
No, I love them.
I'm gonna go and like put out my knee, give someone a concussion.
So there's different types of events, right? There's your conferences where you can go and be an attendee and network. You can have a booth and network. You can be a speaker. All different levels of value for you, depending on
with each of those.
And which kinds of conferences would this be? Were you all still in the insurance industry at this point in time?
Mostly. We were about 80% auto insurance and then 20% mix of other things. So conferences were either clinically based, like brain injury conferences, spinal cord injury conferences, or they were med legal type conferences put on by law firms. Those, so there's a mix of ones that come out. I mean, OSOT was one, COT has one. Those ones tended to be more for recruiting though, if we're looking for new OTs to join. So there was, it depends on really what the conference was offering in terms of whether we would go speak or have a booth. And those I would attend as well, because we had way more fun doing that stuff together. And chatting with people and building those relationships in those environments. And then there's the like fundraiser events, I would call them, which would be more the evenings, weekends, the bowling, the dinners, the auctions, the after parties of the conferences.
Yeah.
And depending on our family situations, we would sort of divide and conquer those.
Okay.
Because I'm really not, I get exhausted socially if I'm doing too much of that, and I really need my sleep. So knowing that about myself, they didn't always enjoy them, and they always didn't have good purpose for me to set up the rest of my week for success. So we were
Yeah.
just always having those conversations in terms of that piece. And then there's, like I said, the golf tournaments and the stuff that I love to do. And then, yes, the online marketing. I decided in 2010, I had a friend of mine who our kids were the same age. And I said to her, hey, I want to start a blog. Like, do you have any interest in that? She's like, oh, I'd love to, help you with that. So
Right.
2010, I got online and I started blogging, and I wrote a blog a week about OT for 7 years.
Okay.
And I started a social media presence. I was on LinkedIn from the beginning. We ran an OTV video series where we had, I think, 20 plus videos about the profession of occupational therapy. It wasn't
Okay.
promoting our business because our business was in a very specific sector, but I was trying to create conversation about occupational therapy
Hmm.
online. I felt one of the biggest risks to our business was people not knowing what OTs did.
Yeah.
Right. So I looked after the social media, the writing. I love to write. Again, entrepreneur, I get to pick what I like to do with my time,
Yeah.
and writing was a huge part of that. So I built the scripts for our videos. I wrote all the blog content. We had the social media presence. We had a monthly newsletter. So I built that infrastructure quite sooner than a lot of other people did, especially in the OT space. OTs tend to be late
Yeah.
adopters of that type of public
Yeah.
social marketing. It's nice to see many more of them online doing that now, but in 2010, nobody was.
Yeah.
And so that was great because I had a lot of reach and I had a lot of interest and a lot of people watching and sort of
Yeah.
enjoying the content, but they weren't necessarily doing that themselves in their businesses at that point.
So how did you build your email list?
Well, every event, right? You want to know who you're interacting with. It's no secret that when you've got a prize at your table and people put their card in,
Yes.
they're entering your list for your newsletter. And so before we use like a formal newsletter program, like a constant contact, we would just
Hmm.
have a running list of every referral source, how many referrals we received from them. And then we would add to the list in terms of at events, what new connections did we make, and then the follow-up of that. So we were very good at being structured. If we're going to put, like, one of the conferences we go to was $7,000 for 2 conferences over a year, like that's not
Yeah,
inexpensive.
it's a lot. Yeah.
So how do we optimize that output, right? How do we turn that around and have really good follow-up so that we can extend that effort as fulsome as possible? So we had really good sort of follow-up from every event that we would go to, and adding to those lists and connecting with people and
Right.
providing, if they wanted a sample report of something, we would provide that. We would follow up, whatever. So
Okay.
yeah.
And was your newsletter industry specific, or was that more generic? What does OT do about OT as well?
Well, it would connect. So this is where I'm also big on multi-purpose. So if I'm going to write a
Hmm.
blog, it's going to be for my website, for people looking there. It's for
Yeah.
social media circulation, and it's on my newsletter. So the newsletter would highlight the blogs of the month. It would talk about, new and exciting things with the business, whether we had a new therapist in a new area, we started a different line of service, maybe some education around, a certain program or something that we were offering. Um, and usually something helpful, like what's just
Yeah.
something that, are the people that read our newsletter might be interested in knowing about. So always adding value and sort of just continuing to be front of mind.
Okay. And then there was a lot of, at this point, I guess a later point in your practice, were you still communicating directly with the referral sources so that you could gather that information and clients, or were you a little bit removed from that process and that was more the admin side of things while you did more big picture work?
Well, the newsletter was all me. So I
Yeah.
would, with the person that worked with me on that, we would structure it monthly with a format, and then we would just populate the format. So
Hmm.
usually, though, you're right, a lot of the newsletter would be inspired by a situation or a
Yeah.
circumstance or a question we were asked, a challenge that, we maybe encountered, maybe some clinical success stories, depending. So it really was an inspired process generally,
Yeah.
beyond the blogs and stuff that we had put out with intention. Because I would usually like library my blogs. So I would write a bunch of them, put them in a library for future circulation. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like day of, I'm trying to write this little book and I'm like, I don't know what to talk about. So I would generally try to book days in my calendar to do my blog writing. So I always had a library to access.
It's interesting. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about your earlier comment around that internal divide between are you a clinician or are you a business owner? And some of these inspirational pieces or stories might be lent to based on those frontline clinical experiences. So I can just appreciate how content would be driven from something like that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really
So
good content opportunities.
two spots to go into, and one is technology, because we had commented earlier about how you sold your business. I know we didn't get a chance to
Yeah.
get into that, but you sold pre-COVID, pre-AI, but I'm assuming that there are some pieces of technology that you've used in your business to help leverage, whether it's an intake process, or can you share with us some of your technological pieces or that helped you leverage the business, we'll say.
Yeah, this is one of the things where Julie falls short because I am not a fan of technology. So even having a blog and putting out a video series, those were huge stretch points for me.
Okay.
And until I got comfortable, really uncomfortable experiences, but I love the growth in that.
Yeah.
So from a tech perspective, we were at the point where we needed to bring in a proper software system for managing
Yeah.
our, because I said like hundreds of referrals,
Yeah.
sizable revenue. And we were investigating that process, but realized that with intention to sell, the person we were going to be selling to would have a system that we would have to
Yeah.
integrate anyway. So what we did as sort of, I would call it a Band-Aid, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs do this as well, but we had QuickBooks. And
Yep.
our financial records really became our source of truth for the business because they did tell us what our revenue was, how much we were paying everybody, which clinician was billing what, how much we were paying them, where our administrative costs were going, operational costs, conferences, marketing. Like we had it all very well organized and managed, but we would use that for most of our metrics.
Okay.
Was our financial accounting system. And then, of course, being in auto, we had to use HCI, and HCI
Yeah.
has some really good metrics available as well. Treatment plans approved, denied, partially approved, invoices, all that stuff. So we would pull some metrics out of HCI. But the rest of it was using just a Windows Explorer and having our files really well organized, open files, closed files, ones that were pending. And then, keeping it really streamlined. So our folders were, and Seema, you know me, my folders were very organized around
color coded and
like documents in, documents out, right? Like it was just so that we could sort and we could provide a file record very quickly, but recognize fully that we needed to move beyond that and ideally have a system that would sync with HCI, would give us, what we missed was the clinical dashboard. And what always worried me as a business owner was that these clinicians were out with a bunch of intellectual property about my business that I didn't have access to.
Right.
If they didn't tell me what their activities were today, I wouldn't know which clients they saw,
Yes.
if they were on track of that file. And so the solution was to use a technology where they would enter their time and their activities so that I could go in and get a quick dashboard of, oh, these files are on track, or hey, this file now is outdated, this report hasn't been submitted, that kind of thing. So we had looked at using an available software system. We had done the research on that and decided we were going to custom build something. And through the custom build, we got some pricing and we were like, okay, we're going to wait, just because we knew it was A, expensive, and B, we were probably going to be migrating to a different system.
Right.
And you know what? It has changed so fast because as you're saying these things, I'm remembering that before COVID, we were still terrifyingly huge Dropbox that required like a literal map to organize. And we had just started using Clinico, which we later switched to Owl. So those are all, software management system, but the features are just getting better and better all the time now. So some of the newer therapists that we've been talking to are migrating to, different, clinic management softwares that cover everything you just mentioned at once. I'm really curious to know, and Seema, I think I'm taking us off into a new track. I was curious a little bit, Julie, to learn about that selling decision. At what point did you say, okay, I'm good? What made you and your partner decide that?
Well, when we merged, the whole objective of merging, we called it Operation Quality of Life, because we were both working more than we wanted to. We were both the sole decision maker. It's lonely at the top.
Yeah.
And we were leveraging each other as colleagues anyway during that time where we had some clinicians working for both of us. I had shared my contract. We were using a similar consent form that I think, because my business had come a bit ahead of hers. So we had been a support to each other, I guess, in the building of these businesses. So the goal was, let's bring them together and let's benefit from all of the wins of that decision.
Right.
which is a risky decision. Most business partnerships actually fail. But we trusted that we were the right fit for each other. It's a marriage. It really is a marriage. Like, and we
Yeah.
would joke that we basically got married. We brought our practices, our families together, and it was wonderful. But there was an intentional strategy to sell because I was starting to get bored, to be honest. I
Mhm.
was realizing that this industry wasn't, I didn't like the way legislation was changing, and I didn't like the path that
Yeah.
I saw in terms of the threats of the sector.
Yeah.
And rightly or wrongly, I have a pretty strong strategy brain. So I can kind of look 10 years in the future and go, I don't like what I see, and what do I back that up to my behavior today?
Yeah.
So I had looked at the business landscape of the business we were in, and our first intentional plan was to diversify and to try to diversify our revenue from being a lot of auto sector into another sector.
Yeah.
And we put a lot of money and time into building our presence in other industries, and we didn't do it at a scale or a volume that was a backup to our main sector, right? When 80%
Yeah.
of your revenue is coming from one place,
Right. Yeah.
and you think that's going to go down to 50%, like, that's a huge business risk. So,
We were in the same situation a couple of years ago. Yeah.
right.
And it
So
really influenced. It's funny because there's a lot of similarities between what you're talking about and what Seema and I talked about at the beginning. So we have the
yeah.
same risk. Yeah, it's stressful.
Well, it is. And then you also get to a point where you know what you're not good at and what you're not necessarily going to pay for the gap. So one of the gaps was sales. We were doing the marketing and the sales as best we could, but we weren't able to compete with companies that had a dedicated sales team
Yeah.
that were out, and that was the role, and that's what they were good at. And so then you go, okay, do I want to take on a six-figure salary and a commission-based model to bring somebody in to try, and then do we have capacity to fill those referrals, and do we want to
Yeah.
hire and train? And so you start having these conversations with yourself. And so ideally, knowing that the industry looked like it was going to become an industry I no longer would have passion for,
Hmm.
that was my first concern. Is like, me without passion is not good news for
Yeah.
anybody. So
Yeah.
I was like, I see where this is going. I don't see myself being able to weather this storm, in terms of my own interest in this business, the challenges, the changing insurer behavior, the changing lawyer behavior, the motivation of the clients in some
Yeah.
cases was also an issue, right? Where we all had these competing agendas. And I just didn't see where I fit with that as I go forward. So it became a very intentional strategy, and it takes years. So it takes 3 to 7 years really to have an intentional strategy to sell. Like, it really is a strategy decision. And you've got to build your business and prepare your business for those sale conversations. So there's a formula, there's a way your business should look to get optimal value. You're going to be asked to do diligence, all sorts of information about your business. And you want to be able to provide that information very quickly to show that you've thought through this, to show that you're prepared. So I knew that I needed runway. And so
Yeah.
once we realized that diversifying and giving Julie's brain something fun to do in another industry for a while wasn't really going to be our success story, then we leaned into, okay, let's make sure this business has optimal value for a sale discussion. Wasn't going to happen, fine. Like, we were good, but and then you find your suitor and you find a potential
Right.
buyer. You look at who's out there doing the work you're doing, seems to have similar values. You seem to respect and understand their work, and you can initiate that conversation, and you can plant that seed, and you can start those conversations. And my MBA really helped with that, because
Oh,
I actually
yes.
took mergers and acquisitions. That's when I merged my
Mm.
business as a project actually
Mm.
in that course. But I also knew what acquisition and sale looked like. And so I prepared
Okay.
the business over many years. I had a business coach actually who helped me with that, because I
Yeah.
wanted to be accountable to moving that objective forward, because it's so easy to wake up every morning and just get into the weeds of today, right? And so I had to make sure that I was, being accountable to what that intention was. And then once we found, our buyer, then it took 2 years to really work through those conversations and to make sure that all the T's were crossed and I's were dotted, to make that happen. So it's not something people, to sell your business because you have to, either a health event
Yeah.
or I'm done, or there's some threat or risk I don't want to navigate.
Yeah.
It's not going to go as well as if, like anything else, is that you put thought into it and you prepare for it.
And I
That
feel like we
makes
could
good
have a whole
sense.
other episode on the
Yeah.
selling.
could.
And then I think we could have a whole other episode on where you are now, because that's a
sure.
whole other part of entrepreneurialism too. So
Sure.
just to take us out, Julie, what is one thing you want to leave our listeners with?
I think at some point you have to decide, am I a clinician or am I an entrepreneur or a business owner? And so many healthcare professionals are not prepared to be in business for themselves. And like I said, we start accidentally. All of a sudden, we realize this thing could be viable, and we make a lot of mistakes trying to get there. But I see so many that just feel so inadequate trying to do it. And they report that. They're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have lots of fears. I feel, imposter syndrome is something people say. I'm not sure I love that term, but I just like, they're always worried about the bottom falling out. And now as a business coach, I have to say to a lot of people, like, are you prepared to be a business owner? Because that's a totally different mindset shift. And like I said, it's people over profit in healthcare, but running a business and making business decisions around what the business needs is very different than running, a practice based on a clinician mindset of how do I be most helpful? How do I keep people happy with me? How do I not drop the ball? They're totally different headspaces. And at some point you have to decide which one you want to be in and then make that shift and learn the ropes to do it.
I hope that some of our listeners are really taking that to heart and thinking and asking themselves right now, do I want to be a business owner? Do I want to be a business person? Thank you so much for leaving us with that thought, Julie. It's been such a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host Shari and I, we want to thank you for listening to From Clinical to Entrepreneurial OT Private Practice Journeys. We hope you've enjoyed listening and learned something along the way. Let us know if there are other topics you'd like OSOT to explore for a future podcast by emailing us at osot@osot.on.ca. Thanks again for tuning in.